This video is sponsored by Psychiatric Study. Okay, hola all, welcome back to Soul Mechanics yet again. This video is going to be my first of what I presume will be at least a few videos in a series regarding evolution as a part of the sidetracks course, a topic for the sidetracks course. To note, before we continue, for any spotters watching, you might be able to discern the associations regarding what I will have placed in the intro before our actual official intro, and how that applies to what we're working with here, which is in fact kind of an inside joke, but at the same time pretty sincerely serious. Sincerely serious an issue there. And B, I think I managed to provide somewhat better lighting for these videos, although it does look kind of bland, but gets the job done. Anyways, of course, this is a sidetracks course, so I'm just going to go off rambling on tangents and try to keep it together as best I can. There are a few primary factors that I need to hit, and we're going to begin with what should be regarded the premise or the basis, at the very least the groundwork for what we're dealing with here, because again, these evolution videos are going to be regarding atheism primarily, considering that atheism does in fact seem to regard evolution as being one of their deities, so to speak. Amongst others, they are in fact polytheists in nature, in ultimate reality, the atheist, or at least the New Age atheist activism circuits. So we have established in previous videos, and we're going to use Demi and her response to us as exemplary values that she presented are going to be made use of throughout the course of these. So be prepped for that. And again, this is for Demi and for her fans and for any other atheist persons that might be checking in. Also, I'd like to hopefully remind myself to make note of a certain commenter that popped into our channel on that video, the High Noon video that came over from Demi's channel, that I hugely appreciate, man. It's really nice to have you aboard. You are very heavily equipped to be a very critical and powerful asset in the field of the initiative, technically, or generally speaking. So, to begin with, now, atheists, they tend to hold evolution itself really as being their kind of God concept. And of course they regard it as being just abstract randomness, just this random culmination of things that happen to smash into each other, by chance alone, and just result in these exceptionally, seemingly very deliberately designed constructs that come into play thereof. But they go ahead and regard it as just being purely random and without any meaning or reason behind it whatsoever. They discard the notion of there being an intelligent design in play, and they don't really know why they're doing that. Obviously, they don't have any evidences to provide to that effect, likely, or rather largely, because the fact of the matter is that there are no evidences. In fact, the entire premise of their understanding is based on the lacking of evidences, and they seem to think that because they're unable to see the evidences in play, that it must thereby mean, ultimately, that whatever it is that they're deciding not to believe in must not be a potentiality, because they don't have evidence for it, although the evidence for it does in fact exist, and it's just really blatant out in the open. I'm really baffled as to how so many people can miss it. Now, as regards quantum mechanics, we've begun to cover this before. We're going to go over it briefly here. I'm going to try and see the premise for atheism is that they don't believe in an existing God, and they believe, in fact, that God cannot exist, but, well, they want to believe, they want to impress that God cannot exist, but ultimately it's just pretty much an observation on their part, resulting in the consideration that they do not believe God exists because of what they perceive as being a lacking of evidence. But again, the only reason that they're lacking this evidence is because the atheists, just as do cultist influences, Christians and what have you, cherry pick their beliefs, so too do atheists very, very hugely cherry pick science. Yet they claim to adhere to science and have a firm belief in science, or rather a firm understanding of science. They don't consider it a belief in most cases, but that is in fact what it is. Science itself, in fact physics itself, is an entirely faith-based consideration. And we've gone over this before, but ultimately the premise is that they don't believe a God exists. And I'm going to go ahead and explain to them right here and now how, in fact, a God does exist, and why, in fact, they seem to believe that it doesn't, or would rather, why they would really want to believe that. Now, as regards the findings of quantum mechanics, which again is a vanguard of science and is pushing the envelope in so many ways and making so much great progress along these lines, we have the very basics of quantum mechanics in play, which very clearly show us that our observation of a thing, and again this is coming back to the idea of collective consciousness, which is what we were kind of debating, or attempting to debate with Demi in the High Noon series, that just again never even really happened. But we don't even have to make use of the evidences that we had provided in that video. It's very simply basic common sense, and I'm going to show you right here and now, point blank obvious. Throughout the course of our studies into quantum mechanics, we find very basic premises such as our observation of any given something causes for it to arrange itself, to address us directly, and to present itself as being what we expect for it to be. That is to say, we know that wave functions exist. Ultimately, there is an overall wave function existing, and that it isolates and kind of, I guess you could say, collaborates itself in such a way as to present to us whatever it is that we need for it to the moment that we observe it. Thereby, it's very clearly stated, and this is known, this is very evidently known, that our observation of any given something is in fact the directive influence that causes for it to come into being. So right then and there, again, the atheists are going to even go so far as to deny that consciousness exists, even though they are just that. They're going to refute the consideration of an existing intelligent consciousness in play, whilst again, this is showing us that our observation causes for particles to arrange themselves. Thereby, obviously, if our observation is affecting the processing of material reality as we know it, of physicality as we know it, that would happen to imply, infer, if not absolutely establish, that in fact consciousness exists because we can see that it is affecting the world. That our observation affects the activities of our environment, thereby consciousness most certainly exists. And in fact, the fact that memory as we know it, which is to say material physicality, arranges itself in response to that observation, that not only is consciousness most certainly existing, but that it is in fact intelligent. It knows what it's doing. It knows precisely what it's doing, even better than we do. So yes, consciousness exists. Now, consciousness has a direct influence upon the establishment of our environment and our experience. That is to say, the application of consciousness is the activating principle of experience, and we all share experience. Thereby, we all share the consciousness. So now, B, we have a collective consciousness in play. This is irrefutable. Simple, basic, point blank, right in your face, common sense. Now, that's true. Insofar as we know, that is what is happening. And it does in fact back what the elder traditions had proposed to us. That, again, before modern religion hijacked the values they put into play and warped them. Now, God, deity, before modern religion came into play and hijacked the system, as it were, hijacked the God concept. The God concept presented by the elder traditions, beyond all of their ideas of gods and you know, higher beings, titans, what have you, they all had this consideration in play of there being a God concept, which is in fact defined as being omniscient, omnipresent, causal, ultimately causal in the creation of reality, in the creation of the world, and is not only personal but interpersonal in the sense that it's something that we are all sharing, and every spiritual consideration, even Christianity, as concerns the teachings of Jesus Christ himself directly, whether he's a real person or not, this could be fictitious character, it doesn't matter. His teachings very clearly tell us the same thing. Every single spiritual consideration, it seems they can't get around displaying this factor that, in fact, God is to be considered, the deity factor is to be considered as something that is shared amongst all of us, that is within and all around us, that in fact is us. And we are all sharing this, and we are all one and the same thing. We're a unified field, as it were. So, I mean, right then and there, that's evidence of the existence of a God figure, because it fits all the descriptions, all the descriptors that we put into play, the description of what we have assigned, you know, the descriptions we've assigned to what deity is supposed to be, to what God is supposed to be. It fulfills all of these parameters. It is omniscient in the sense that it knows everything simply because it is all that there is to be known. B, it's omnipresent in the sense that it is in fact existing within and all around us. We are sharing experience, and it is consciousness what becomes the activating principle of experience as we know it. So reality, whatever it is in fact created in every passing moment on the spot by this consciousness. So right there, if you just look at it, all you have to do is look at that, and it becomes very clearly evident, in fact irrefutable, that this God concept does in fact exist, because it is every definition that's placed upon what God is supposed to be, it fits it perfectly, fulfills it entirely. So that's what we define God as being, and that's what it is. It is the collective consciousness that we are all a part of. It is the collective mechanism, the construct of reality as we know it. In fact, essentially, it is physics and the application of physics upon our experience. You might say, in fact, that experience itself is what God is, ultimately being that it is the resulting factor. So that's undeniable if you're just looking at it. The thing is that for the atheist community, the only thing, and the just all-encompassing thing that is in fact distracting you from seeing that clearly evident reality is going to be the values put into play by modern religion, wherein they present this God figure as being an absurdly humanized sort of persona or personality, this presence that is absurdly, humanized in every possible way. And honestly, I'm not sure that this is good or bad. I'm starting to lean towards the idea that it might very well have been intended to be a good thing, considering that, well, we know from what the elder traditions tell us that this collective entity exists, that we're all a part of it, that there is in fact one soul in play, and that is what God is, being that it is the omnipresent, omniscient force that is responsible for the creation of reality and experience as we know it. I mean, the fact that we're all sharing this experience very clearly implies, if not proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that we do in fact share this consciousness. And the consciousness is obviously real because we can see it working. It's functioning right in front of us. It's always been there, right in front of your face. It's just, you've been distracted by this, again, absurdly humanized, God figure character that's been placed in such scriptures as the Bible. However, as I was saying, I don't think that that's really inherently negative, because the fact of the matter is that it does assert and back up the concept that we do have this collective consciousness in play, that we are all a part of this one soul that is in fact the God factor. But once we start attributing these characteristics, these human characteristics to it, it becomes this sort of monstrous, dictatorial, selfish, careless, hurtful, hateful, essentially demonized sort of a figure that is terrifying and is a tyrant, and that does in fact speak directly to the nature of our circumstances, directly to the nature of our being. It speaks to the nature of our spirit as an overall species, and in stating that, well, this collective consciousness, this God figure does in fact exist, this God presence exists in the living world as a part of all things that are within the construct. It is the construct, the unified field. Yet once we start attributing these human characteristics to it, it very quickly warps into this distorted, tyrannical, maniacal figure, which is clearly presenting to us the values that do in fact define and represent us as a species. It shows us how insane we truly are. It gives us a depiction of the God figure as being what we've made of it so far, which is essentially a villain. And it's battling against us. And under the dictates of this presented humanized God figure, we are ultimately divided and conquered. We are destroyed by ourselves, by our own construct. We use our very power of heaven against us to create this nightmare scenario out of what had initially been intended a paradise. So, I mean, I'm thinking that perhaps on some level, and again, this is speaking to the nature of a spotter, looking at this from that first-person onlyness perspective for the commenter, that this commenter Dom Trussardi, who had initially been really shitty to me in comments on Demi's Discord or on her channel, actually came over to our channel and had an open, honest discussion with me, and he actually raised some questions that most people would never even consider existing. It's just slipped right by most people. This guy, he's got the eyes of a spotter on him. And for, if you happen to be watching, sir, I really hope that you do pursue the avenues that I've provided you, the leads that I've given you. You could make a hell of a great difference in this area and do a lot of good, do a lot of damage to the common enemy that we do in fact have in play. So anyways, I'm not going to raise the questions that he did here, although I will say that basically it was something along the lines of, well, if we were to consider collective consciousness as being a concrete reality, then how would that benefit us? How could we make use of it? One thing I'd like to say that I did not give you in my direct response to you is that ultimately it allots for us to all just go ahead and consider ourselves to be together in the same boat, so that we can toss away these ridiculous discrepancies that we hold so tight to. One moment. I need to test something out here. Right, so what I had done there was try to take that clip and condense it so that I can make enough space for this all to come together properly in the end, because I do run out of space on the RA often, and sometimes I find myself in a predicament where I'm unable to convert the videos, and we actually lose a lot of material because of that. So we'll get further into the discussion regarding Dom Trussardi and all of the other facets that are involved, but I should like to note that, as I've stated here, it is very clearly evident that the God concept, the God figure, God itself does in fact exist. It's just something far removed from what we've been told it's supposed to be, based on the absurdly humanized, accommodations or the adornments that modern religion places upon it. But again, those are very telling in and of themselves, be it deliberately or indeliberately. They get values across that speak to the nature of our reality, and in fact present us with solid, reasonable convictions as to how and why we might go about making differences in this regard. It shows us what humanity really is at face value as a collective entity as it stands, and presents us with this monster figure of ourselves that we do in fact need to be dealing with. Essentially, the God of the Bible and of other such scriptural accounts is the enemy within. It is the monster that we are in fact fighting as a collective species, yet under its rule we are divided and conquered, as stated. The only thing that's actually distracting the atheists particularly from this point blank, exceptionally evident realization is that it is going to be the factors, the values, the concepts presented by modern religion's absurdly humanized adornment of this figure, the person God, as though God is to be regarded as possessing of human characteristics and attributed human considerations. God is not human. God is everything. It's the force behind everything, and it is the force in play in everything. It is consciousness itself, and it is our personal relationship to the overall consciousness and the interactions that occur thereby. So again, that's really the primary distraction that atheists get caught up by, and they don't realize that this is in fact designed by religion. It's a trap set by religion, and you buy into these tricks hook, fucking line, and sinker, in the sense that, okay, just to briefly present a slight overview of religion, again, as I have so many times before. Modern religion, the first thing that it does, its basic premise, is to put into play the value or the consideration that you are possessing of a soul that is in some way separate from who and what you are immediately, and not only insinuates or implies thereby that you are incapable of actually understanding yourself to any reasonable degree, to any rational or considerable degree, but that you are removed from your actual self in some sense or another. Either the soul is what you are, or you are what you are, but in either case, the soul, the aspect of your property here that is in fact in danger, that is in a hazardous position wherein it can be tarnished, and in fact is presented as being innately tarnished inherently, that it's born in sin, and that you need to be working. You're not allotted any room for investments that would allow for you to progress. You're called upon in this case to spend the entirety of your life working as hard as you can to achieve an atonement, or to somehow make up for the sins of the father, as it were. So you're placed in an exceptionally depthful handicap, an extreme disadvantage, wherein you have to consistently be working to bring yourself up to what they present as being the par, You know, the bar is there and you need to live up to it, and the very best that you can hope to do is get close to living up to that, and if you can manage to live up to that, to try and maintain that. But there is no room for you to grow. That's not allowed, and there's a reason for that. Bear in mind that later on down the line, evolution comes into play, and evolution stands, insofar as we can tell, because we're blinded by these distractions, evolution seems to be contrary to creation, which of course it is actually not at all. They're one and the same thing. But religion initially presents you with the idea that not only are you separate from this soul that you're possessing that is in immediate danger at all times, but that you are in fact subject to the judgments of a further removed God concept, this humanized God concept that's going to be passing judgments upon this soul of yours, and thereby inflicting whatever penalties are to be incurred upon you as a person, even so far as to toss you away into an eternal damnation. I mean, it's not just a reward and penalty system, it's a very extreme and just flat out incoherent version of a reward and penalty system that's put into play. And you get so caught up in that, the indoctrination involved in that causes for you to actually not only believe that to be the case on a very deep level that you're going to be hard-pressed to reach later on in your development, but it also associates all other prior spiritualities. It very heavily suggests that they are the false idols that are being worshipped, these elder traditions, from what Christianity stole its values and its determinations, stole its mythologies, its legends, everything that Christianity and other such scriptural-based orientations, espouse, are based on what factors and articles have been stolen from the prior traditions and warped in this way, which is going to have to be investigated to some extent as to whether this is deliberate or indeliberate. The fact is that a lot for you to see the truth of the matter, wherein it is in fact presenting us with a solid solution. But so I mean, in that light, modern religion could very well have a great deal of positive aspects to it along those lines. We'll get to that later. In any case, the only thing that's distracting you from directly observing this immediately available, evident reality that there is in fact a collective consciousness in play, and that it fits the profile of what we consider deity to be, that it is in fact an existing God. God exists. It's right there in front of your face, point blank, always has been. It's just slipped right by you because religion tricked you into playing the game in that manner, to missing those values, or at least misappropriating them. And all that atheism does, at the very least, this new age atheist activism circuit, all that it really does is take that ball and run with it a step further, in the sense that it not only removes you, detaches you from the God concept and from the nature of reality itself, but it isolates you, and it entirely removes God, the God concept, and the consideration of a greater nature, the mystery of existence, the greatness and miraculousness of this immaculate conception in which we find ourselves. Just totally removes you from it, but breaks it entirely, and it indoctrinates you further, so much so to the effect that you in fact have such a severe level of indoctrination and cognitive dissonance in play that you in fact go ahead and cherry pick everything you come across for the sake of serving a confirmation bias that allows for you to discern, under the premise of having absolutely no evidence to the effect whatsoever, that you couldn't possibly bring yourself to believe in any sort of a God concept whatsoever, where in fact the God concept itself is the inherent power you have as an existing being, as a consciousness, as a facet of consciousness, a shard of the overall one soul identity. You do in fact have available the power of heaven to create as you will, And again, this is it. Consciousness exists. It has a direct influence over the creation of reality. It is omniscient. It is omnipresent. It is everything that deity is supposed to be, except for these humanized factors that are later adorned by modern religion, specifically for the sake of masking it, specifically for the sake of instilling in you hatred for this deity. If any of you think that religion expected for you to actually buy into that bullshit, think again, man. Think deeper. Actually put eyes on the ball and play here. It's a catch-22 scenario wherein you either buy into the religious bullshit and follow it completely, or you go ahead and figure it out, figure out the fraudulence, become an atheist, activist, and totally reject the very concept of any sense of spirituality whatsoever, because every spirituality coming around before religion has been associated with it so heavily that you seem to think they're one and the same, and you're unable to see the distinctions because you're working with this extreme confirmation bias. And that's basically where we are as it stands with modern atheism and with our evolution as a species. Now, this is just to prep us for the next video, which is going to delve real deep into evolution and the values presented thereby. So that's going to be it for now. Thank you all for watching. Kila Salai, Teriyuni Siari, Namaste.